All right. Today we're sitting down and we're talking to Russ Bedford. Those who watch Flint Talk Radio with a regular basis might have remembered that he was in here a few months ago with his wife, Crystal Pepperdine, talking about the little library they put out in front of their house. And they live right here on the east side of Flint, which is maybe 6 blocks away from where the studio's at. Welcome again, Russ.
Thank you very much.
Today I saw that, the other day I saw that you're involved in another project, and I thought it was it kind of goes along with something that's already going on here in Flint. People are like doing a lot of planting of gardens in their yards and taking over abandoned fields. So why don't we talk about what you're doing now?
Okay, well, my wife and I have had a garden at our property for the past 2 years, and I've always been very concerned with sustainable gardening, sustainable practices, that kind of thing. And I was reading a book called Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties by a woman named Carol Depp. And while I was reading it, I got the idea that that's kind of a niche that's missing here in Flint. That's something we could do as a growth, is have our own Flint, adapted varieties that do well in our soil, with our climate, with our water, that kind of thing, with our pests, with our diseases. And I tried to think about how we might go about doing that. And the most obvious way that came to me was through seed saving. Every time you save seed, you're basically selecting the best plants, will produce the best seed. And I came up with this concept of what I'm calling a seed democracy, where I give for free to people who have a garden in the city of Flint. I give 10 free seeds, and we have our little packets here, 10 free seeds, and the catch is you can grow them and use them however you see fit, but you choose 20 of the seeds and you return them to the seed democracy, and each of those seeds kind of acts as a vote. People are voting for what types of plants they like. Maybe they like tall plants or short plants, or maybe they like yellow peas or green peas, for example. But their gardens get a vote. Because if you grow in a hoop house, you're selecting plants that grow well in a hoop house. If you grow organically, selecting plants that grow well organically. If you have poor soil, you're selecting plants that grow well in poor soil, things like that. So the gardens get a vote and the gardeners get a vote. And that's why the project is limited to Flint gardens, because we need to develop that variety for Flint.
Of course, Flint's I guess it's considered a temperate zone, where Michigan is a temperate zone, right? Which means we have changing seasons.
Sure.
And as we talked about just before we started doing this interview for the on air, there's a lot of highly hybrid selections out there, and you avoid that. This is not hybrid stuff you're using.
No, these are what are called open pollinated. All seeds used to be open pollinated. That was the only way that they were valuable for saving seeds, and I'll explain why. At the beginning of the 20th century, the idea of hybrid corn was kind of one of the first ones. When you take one established variety and another established variety and you cross them, that's called a hybrid. And very often that hybrid, in its first generation, will outperform either its parents. You have taller corn plants with more ears per plant, more kernels per ear, that kind of thing. But after that first generation, it's basically a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get. You might get one of the parents, you might get something totally different. So what hybrids allowed seed companies to do is have patented varieties that they could control. They alone knew who the parents were, and so no one else could reproduce those varieties, which meant that farmers, if they wanted to grow these high-performing varieties, they had to buy their seeds every single year. And that was a totally new concept that never existed before. With open pollinated varieties, if you save the seed, every year you get back the same thing.
Some people, a lot of people don't realize that the corn that we have, for example, the field corn as well as the sweet corn that we consume on our table, from our tables, that's so vastly different than original corn or maize or whatever it was originally. It's actually a form of a grass, wasn't it? And they just kept on getting more and more kernels.
Yep, it's a grass called teosinte. It's the closest living relative to corn. And to look at it, you can't imagine how anyone would have developed it. It has small, you won't even call them ears. They're very small heads of grass with small kernels. And over thousands of years, they selected it and selected it and selected it to have large ears covered with the sheath, to the point where now corn is actually incapable of reproducing itself without human help. The leaves that cover the corn ear prevent it from dropping its own seed. So without humans, corn would cease to exist.
See, that's like another thing is too. Recently in the Facebook postings, I see a lot of people who are outraged by Monsanto, the biggest producer of grains for seeds for grains and everything, probably worldwide,
Yeah,
certainly United States. And they're engaging in. They also do so much, genetically modifying stuff
yeah.
that there's like they're actually breeding kind of like creating a natural pesticide in certain corn that's actually now it's actually going to have a harmful effect on humans consuming it.
Well, there's different approaches with the genetic modification. Some plant varieties have been engineered to produce their own toxins, and these are toxins that exist in nature. They're Bacillum thuringiensis, for example, BT toxin. Um, that's a toxin that's normally produced in certain bacteria, and they've genetically modified certain plants to have that toxin in them. And some plants produce toxin on their own. The thing is, they produce the toxin in a couple of cells sometimes. But with this genetic modification, they have made it so that the entire plant produces the toxin all the time, which means, yeah, you can actually ingest it. And what it actually has had an adverse effect because the pests and stuff that normally would have been killed by it are becoming immune to this toxin. So whereas before it had kind of a mild relationship with between the plants and the insects that were feeding on it, now you have this severe relationship that forced these insects to either adapt or to perish, and they adapted, and you're creating super pests and super weeds that won't be killed by pesticide. So like I said, the toxins built into the plants, that's one strategy. The other strategy that I think Monsanto is more interested in because it makes them money is plants that are tolerant to Roundup, so that you can spray Roundup directly on the plants. And Roundup is just a broad spectrum parasite that kills everything. But these plants have resistance built into them, so you can spray Roundup directly on them and it won't kill the plants. The problem is, again, now you're creating super weeds because these weeds are becoming resistant to Roundup. And the next step is this stuff called 2,4-D. It's an even more nuclear pesticide, and the same thing is going to happen again. They're going to be resistant to 2,4-D, and nothing's going to kill these weeds.
And another thing is too is if there isn't a harmful effect, humans aren't as adaptive as plant species because it takes our generations don't go from like a matter of months
Yeah,
to a growing season. Ours take 18 to 20
yeah,
years, and to work through like an immunity or some kind of way of offsetting the chemical imbalance, if it would ever be possible. I mean, that's actually a form of just like a happenstance,
yeah.
coming across that. So the humans will suffer ultimately from this, possibly.
Absolutely. It's hubris.
Yeah, it's like no. What kind? These are food plants. You're giving out, right?
Yeah, I'm. The project is concerned with edible seeds. I am going to. I've already announced it, and I'm encouraging people to participate. I want to accept donations of seed packets. I know a lot of gardeners, myself included, have old seeds from previous years, or some seeds companies will send you extra seeds, free seeds for large orders, that kind of thing. I want to encourage people to send any unwanted seed packets or old seed packets to me for the Flint Seed Democracy, and our website, Facebook page has our address on it. Or you can meet us at a different event. We're at lots of local events. Um, I'm encouraging people to give us their seed packets, and that includes flower seeds. Because that's going to be a future, possibly fundraising incentive for the Flint Seed Democracy to allow us to purchase seeds and do promotion and that kind of stuff. As far as the seeds that we are making available for free, those are plant seeds. I think that we have a lot of vacant land in Flint, and it represents a chance to regain some of our food security here, which we have none of to speak of. It's been a big issue lately that I think there are 6 supermarkets in the entire city of Flint, actual grocery stores. Now that doesn't count gas stations and convenience stores where the quality of produce is low, if any fresh produce is even available. Um, so being able to produce our own food and not import all of it and know where it comes from and know that it's safe is important. So I think first priority above growing flowers, which are fine, and I'm growing some flowers, although most of them are edible, the first priority is to grow food on our land.
See, I know that there was on the History Channel a few months ago. There was a panel of experts sitting around talking about things we can do because of the global warming plus the dependency on foreign oil is going to make it the cost higher to actually go any place to get for shipping and everything else for different vegetables, crops, and everything. They're encouraging production, local production of foodstuffs, and they're actually encouraging people to find ways of actually raising fish in ponds and locally, and some are more suited for that than others,
Yeah.
obviously. So I mean, this is you're kind of like on the cusp of this beginning,
Yeah, I tried to put myself there. Like I tried to stay abreast of all this, the changes that are happening with the way that food is produced, and local is very, very important. And to me, that almost goes without saying. I know that it's not that way for everybody, but local is important because of the oil factors you mentioned. But oil has even further reaching implications. Most people, when they think of their home garden, maybe they use a little bit of Miracle-Gro, that kind of thing. But typically, the backyard garden is, much more organic than any kind of industrial farming process. And what people don't think about a lot of the time is that the fertilizers that are used in industrial farming processes are made from natural gas. And the machines that do the farming run on oil and gasoline. And the pesticides are made from, again, natural gas and they're petroleum derived, which means as the price of gas goes up or as the price of oil goes up, industrial farming is becoming more and more unsustainable than it already was. So yeah, absolutely, it's all intimately linked, and seed saving is, I think it's seen as kind of a more advanced process, but it has been integral to how food has been produced for all of human history.
Yeah. So no, you have a little basket there. I'm gonna try to get the camera right
Yeah.
on there. So if we could check out, see what some of the stuff you have, we can go over some of the types of some of the types of seeds you have there. I actually got a broad spectrum shot there
Yeah, that's
of
fine.
the basket, but you have several types of seeds there. Now, mostly you said foodstuffs.
Well, actually, this year, this was, like I said, this is kind of our pilot year, and this is a project I think that is going to continue. But I had to focus on something, and we kind of talked about before we started here how some seeds are better suited to seed saving, like hybrids are not well suited to seed saving. Um, what is very well suited is any member of the legume family, beans, peas, that kind of thing. So what I decided to start with is peas. All the seeds I have this year, I started out with 80 packets, and they're all peas. Um, it's a variety called Alaska, and I did some research. I had read another book called Renewing America's Food Traditions, and this is a very, very excellent book and an excellent project that put out the book, and I encourage people to read it. They broke the country down into different what they called food nations based on what used to be the staple crops of the nation, like acorns in California or chestnuts in, say, the Appalachia, and wild rice in the Great Lakes region. And for each region, and we're in the wild rice region, or the wild rice nation, they also made up a list of food crops that used to be common or culturally significant, culturally appropriate, important, that kind of thing, that are now on the verge of being extinct. Either species that aren't grown anymore or varieties of species that aren't grown anymore, like certain pea varieties. So in my own garden, I've taken a lot of the specific varieties that I grow off of their lists. And this variety, Alaska, that I mentioned, is one that is supposed to be very well suited to a Michigan climate. It's an early producer. It grows well in cold areas. And one thing that was important to me is it's a soup pea. It's meant to be dried and used in soup. It's a funny phenomenon that I encountered with green peas and green beans, that it used to be the case that people they grew things for their storage value. They grew beans because they stored very well, and they grew peas because they stored very well. And it became a fad kind of during the French Revolution, the aristocracy, to eat fresh peas and to eat fresh green beans to show that they didn't have to worry about their food security. They were never meant to be eaten that way, and they have much more food value to be stored. So this is a storage pea. It can be eaten as a fresh pea. You shell it and steam it and eat it that way, or it can be dried on the vine and saved for the winter to, like I said, increase food security. And that's how I intend to grow it myself. But people who are participating in the project can use the peas however they want.
You see, that's a good valid point because I remember watching the History Channel. I love the History Channel,
Mm.
and like introduced species of plants like potatoes in Europe become like they become so dependent because it's a cheap source of food that when there is a blight, when there is disease that strikes these, you have devastating effects like the Irish in the 1840s, the Great Irish Potato Famine.
Yeah.
Um, we're not that far off from that because we depend so many on crops like corn,
Yeah.
soy, wheat, and those things are very vulnerable.
Yeah, I think it's something like seven species produce like 95% of the world's food. And there's a couple things in what you just said I want to touch on. And one of them is it's linked to what I mentioned with renewing America's food traditions. And that's that since the beginning of the 20th century, with the advent of hybrid seeds and the industrialization of the seed market, we've lost something like 90% of our genetic diversity, like named varieties of plants. They've just been lost. Like most green beans that you see on the shelf, most green beans that people grow in their gardens are a variety called Blue Lake, or there's another variety called Kentucky Wonder. Those two varieties probably account for almost all of the green beans grown in this country. And I didn't even, maybe I wasn't aware of it, and I found myself growing Blue Lake green beans in my garden 2 years ago, and they were already in the ground before I realized the mistake. But so when we reduce the genetic diversity, we make ourselves more susceptible to these blights. Like if everybody's growing Blue Lake and then a disease crops up that Blue Lake is not resistant to, then all of our green beans are gone. And if we're depending on seed saving for our food security, then we're not going to have any seeds to save after that blight hits us. The other thing I wanted to touch on is you mentioned the Irish potato famine, which is a fantastic segue. Part of the problem with potatoes is they're propagated. I'm losing my headphones, but they're propagated vegetatively, which means that people are replanting the plant over and over and over again. Every garnet chili or Yukon Gold potato in the world is basically a clone of every other one. And that means that they're all susceptible to the same diseases. I heard a really bizarre story from New Zealand where there's this disease that's affecting Tasmanian devils. And some people were doing research on it, and they discovered that it's actually a form of cancer, but it's communicable. And the reason it's communicable, they found, is New Zealand is an isolated population, and all the Tasmanian devils are basically genetically identical. They are essentially the same individual, and they all have the same cancer. It's communicable because it's just jumping from what it sees as one part of the body to another because there's no genetic difference. And the same thing goes for potatoes, for anything that is cut and divided as opposed to propagated from seed. And that includes apple trees. So with the Irish potato famine, everyone is basically growing one variety of potato or a few varieties. A disease, the blight, struck that these potatoes were not able to withstand, and they all were lost. Potatoes typically are divided and grown from other potatoes, but some potato plants do produce seed. There's a syndrome. I think it's called male sterility syndrome that has kind of crept into the genome of most cultivated potatoes. That means that potatoes don't produce seed anymore, which, like corn, again, without humans dividing them, they'd be lost because potatoes don't usually grow from seed in Michigan. But a lot of potato plants do produce seeds still. The first year I grew potatoes, we had seed, and they look like tiny little green tomatoes on the plants. And you can grow potatoes from those seeds. And that's another one of the initiatives we're starting with the Seed Democracy this year that is not limited to people who live in the city of Flint. And I mentioned the donating the seed packets. That's not limited to people in the city of Flint. Anyone that wants to donate to the project can. But with potatoes, if you find that you're growing potato plants and they are setting these little green seed balls, save the seed balls and send them back to us, and we will preserve that seed. Anyone that is capable of starting eggplants or peppers or tomatoes inside with a grow light, or if they have a heated greenhouse, you can start potatoes too. And when you start them, you get a high level of genetic variability, and that introduces disease resistance and pest resistance, and that's going to kind of inject a little bit more life into the potato market because, as I said, we're growing an increasingly limited number of potato varieties, and they're all going to be susceptible to the same diseases if we don't reinvigorate the genetic diversity.
Yeah, this is amazing stuff because I mean it's like I was see on my I'm trying to get my master's degree at the University of Michigan, and anyway I was studying economic development, worldwide economic development, and we went back into the history of and we talked and we did Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and
Guns, yeah,
Steel.
yeah.
He talks about of all the types of animal species, we only domesticate so many types: sheep, cows, chickens, horses,
Yeah.
pigs, stuff like that. Elephants are used in occasional place in the world, but they're not ever bred in captivity. And we also done the same thing with our plants. We've all the types of varieties of plants. It's usually types of peas, beans, like the legumes and stuff like that. Those things have always been domesticated. I think that was my high school biology class. That's what Mendel started doing his work on was pea plants
On
and
peas.
crossbreeding those. So this is amazing stuff. I mean, there are people who probably heard about the great storage area they have was in the Arctic for like seed bank.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that, but yeah.
Yeah, I can't
Um,
either. This is real blank.
that one's it's interesting as kind of an arc, you know. Some people have pointed out. I read a book called "The Seed Underground" by Genesee that was pretty good and detailed a lot of the stuff that's going on with seeds. And they mentioned that sort of seed arc, which is it's valuable for preserving genetic diversity and as kind of a time capsule. But a lot of seeds need to be grown or they lose their viability. Like these seeds are kept under storage, so they're going to remain viable for a long time. But for those of us that don't have the ability to freeze huge quantities of seeds, if you don't grow them every few years, those seeds are going to be worthless. So it is kind of a far off project for us and something that some people have asked about. Uh, I think it's important for those of us in the growing community and any local community, a closed community like that, to make sure we're not wasting our resources. If someone is doing a good job, I think we need to help them do a good job. Like we're not officially affiliated yet with Edible Flint, but if they've done certain work, made certain efforts, I don't want to waste resources, redoing their efforts, and I certainly don't want to waste resources competing with them. So I was trying to find a way to become involved in the community. My wife and I had property up in Clio that we were planning on building a house on, and we were going to be rural homesteaders. And for various reasons, we decided against it. And now we are committed urban homesteaders here on our 10th of an acre lot here in the city. And that meant I was even more committed to Flint than I was previously, and that meant trying to find a way to enter the community as a productive member, kind of. And I had this passion for seeds and this interest in seeds that I didn't see a lot of elsewhere, and it seemed like I was the person. If any one person was going to do it, I wanted to be the person that was going to be in charge of seeds for Flint. And part of that, like I said, for a long-term goal is maybe committing to the resources necessary to store the seeds, and that could mean some dedicated freezer space or refrigerator space, or it could even mean a dedicated facility, kind of like the one that you're mentioning. But that's far off. We're this is our first year. We don't generate any kind of revenue now, and we're doing it for free. And it's fun to kind of think about what it could be in the future.
If somebody's watching this interview with you and they're thinking, I'd like to be involved.
Yeah.
And then maybe they have something to offer. What would you say you needed? Would you obviously money? And I don't know if you're able to take that. Like is it a nonprofit? Do you have
We're
that
not
established?
legally a nonprofit. I guess you could say our spousal organization is Flint Handmade, and they are unique in that they're a nonprofit handcrafting organization. And I believe last I heard that Edible Flint is seeking to become a nonprofit. I'm not sure if they've attained that yet. We may or may not become one in the future. It's unclear yet what our economic model is going to be. Because traditionally you would expect a seed company to provide seeds for the city of Flint or for Edible Flint or for Flint growers. So there's an element of an economic in that. As far as people getting involved, I don't know that I can legally take donations of money, but I can, as I said, I can take donations of seed packets. I can take saved seed of any kind. I don't want to turn anything away, and I want to encourage seed saving. One kind of unique thing that we could take as a resource is if anybody has, and I know that we see them all the time, if you have the little do not eat packets of silica gel, uh, part of the reason you see those in things is they dehydrate stuff. And you can include those in, say, a jar of seeds to keep the seeds dry and keep them from getting moldy. So I'd encourage people out there, if they remember to do it, to save their little do not eat silica gel packets and then give them to us. We'll take as many as people can get. Just save them in a shoebox and bring them to a local event or send them to us in the mail. And again, we do have a Facebook page, and I update it every couple of days and try to keep people abreast of where we're going to be. And I try to attend a lot of local events. And part of the reason I brought my little seed basket here is it's probably one of the easiest ways to spot me at an event. I'll always have this with me with my little seed packets. But also just look for the tall guy with the glasses and the hoodie because I'm pretty much always wearing both of them.
No, it's okay. I was really intrigued by it because I've been doing a lot of studying. Since the Compassion Club started coming here, there was like
Sure.
they were talking. There's the big push now for the grow hemp. There's laws prohibiting hemp growing in the Michigan, the United States, which is absurdity because it's a better. So many, we cut trees down every day for paper. The quality of paper made from hemp is superior.
Mm.
It's what you can grow a couple of crops around the country each year. The paper would be cheaper. It'd be a better quality.
Yeah.
There'd be a sustainability. Also, hemp puts stuff and the nutrients back in the ground. So for crop rotation, that's a good idea. And it's just absurd that they're so caught up in this. Somebody might use this occasionally
Yeah.
for illicit use.
Yeah, I know that it was always used as an intercropping, for nitrogen fixing and that kind of stuff. And a lot of farmers' fields still you'll see wild hemp growing in it. I don't want to weigh in, on any of the more controversial issues of that kind of stuff, but it is funny to me that um, I've heard it said that the best gardeners of our generation, and this is absolutely true, the most technically inclined, advanced gardeners of our generation are growing weed. And it's like, I work at a local hardware store, Gilroy's Hardware, and so I was able to bring some of, the stuff I've learned there to bear on gardening. But it's funny, the guys that will come in the middle of the winter getting liquid fertilizer and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh, I'm interested in gardening. What are you growing? It's like, tomatoes. Or I'm growing plants. That's funny to me. And it's like, just yesterday I ran into a guy who was, accidentally admitted that's what he was growing. And if these gardeners would just apply some of this skill to growing plants, we could reduce a lot of our food security issues
Yes.
pretty quickly.
I mean, it's those kind of people. They're kind of like the pirates. They're kind of the renegades, I
Yeah.
guess. But they have so much knowledge. I mean, they're the ones you want. I mean, if I was growing a garden and I had something looking like to destroy my crops, I'd probably go to a weed grower.
Yeah.
They take so much pain and great effort to keep their crops going. These people are extraordinary nurserymen. They are extraordinary good at this.
I know it's everything that they're doing with marijuana applies to plants. They're grafting and cloning and seed saving. Well, usually getting rid of the seeds, but part of the reason they get rid of the seeds is because if they were to plant them, they get this again huge explosion in genetic diversity, which can be valuable for some other things. But the technical know-how, which isn't really necessary for gardening, but it does produce results. You can garden with just dirt and a couple of seeds and no fertilizer and even a minimum amount of water. I want to introduce the concept of something. This is not my idea, but I haven't discussed it much with the Facebook page or in public. But it's called a land race or a folk race, and historically. Culture or a local culture would save their seeds, save their squash seeds or their tomato seeds or whatever, and they weren't selecting very aggressively. They weren't advanced. They weren't sophisticated, and they were just saving the seeds and replanting them, and they would produce what by our standards you wouldn't call a variety. It would be a tomato variety, a named variety, named for a tribe or a group. And you'd have everything from large tomatoes, small tomatoes, green tomatoes, purple tomatoes, everything, or same thing with peppers or potatoes, all different varieties. And uh, different characteristics, but they'd be labeled under this same land race or folk race, um, that would say, be named for a people, like the Flint potato or the Flint, corn, which there's Flint corn means something else, but um, and that's something I foresee us creating through the seed democracy is um, a wider definition of what a seed variety means. We could have a pea variety, but that doesn't mean that all the varieties are exactly the same. All the peas are exactly the same. They could be yellow, they could be green, they could be wrinkled, they could be smooth, they could be tall, they could be short. There's all different characteristics. And in a healthy species, you would want to see all of these characteristics present because you don't know what the limiting factor is going to be when a pest hits or a drought hits or an insect becomes has a population explosion. Any one of those factors could help you survive it. And to narrow your seed saving to just this one factor, I like tall plants, I like striped tomatoes, you're losing a lot of genetic diversity. I foresee as one of the possible outcomes of the Flint Seed Democracy that we'll have these very diverse populations. Part of that is going to come from not placing a limitation or a restriction on my growers that if you're growing these peas, you can grow other peas too. We actually would encourage you to grow other varieties of the vegetables that we're giving you for free. Your pea variety might have a genetic resistance, disease resistance that our variety lacks, and there's a chance that we'll get across there and get your genes into our peas. There may be something that has been lost via selection in our pea variety that we would get from a commercial pea variety, and that's where there is some value in hybrid seeds, is we can take some of the genetic value that's been bred into those seeds and transfer it into our seeds. So again, the idea like a folk race or a land race, whereas like we have this very narrow definition of what a tomato should look like, and that's part of how Monsanto and industrial farming has become so successful. Is people now have such a limited idea of what a green bean should look like or taste like, or a tomato should look like or taste like, that if they see something that doesn't look like that, unless it's marketed, say in a farmer's market as a novelty, like an heirloom tomato, with a purple tomato or a lumpy looking tomato that conspicuously doesn't look like what we think of a tomato. People want homogeneity. They want a tomato that looks like a tomato, and they want corn that looks and tastes like corn. And that's such a narrow definition. It's a genetic bottleneck, and it's a loss in genetic diversity, and that's very dangerous.
Well, anyway, I mean, I find this subject, very kind of fascinating to me because we all eat, and I mean, let's face it, I'm a large person, so I think about eating a lot. And when the food's not going to be there, I think everybody's going to be more concerned of what could we have done before this happened. And this is just one step. Another thing is too, there's other people out there that I've talked to who are involved in, in the Flint area who are growing gardens and they're, abandoned lots. They've gotten control of the Peace Mob gardens.
Yeah.
I don't know if you probably dealt with them.
Peace Mob, Nick Custer at the Peace Mob has our seeds.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Not just community gardens, but local gardens.
Right.
You asked how people can help, and absolutely. Like when I said not redoubling, efforts that have already taken place. I know that there are gardens all over the city, and I don't want to have to discover them and beat the pavement to try to find them. I will do that as much as I have to, and I'll get in touch with Edible Flint and some of these organizations. But if you know of a community garden that isn't represented or that doesn't have our seeds, this is a free resource, and I encourage community gardens, local gardeners, church gardens, or even businesses to contact us, like us on Facebook, and get your free seeds. Because there's no reason to not take advantage of this.
Flint Seed Democracy, it's on Facebook, right? Because
Yeah,
I liked you
Facebook,
already.
Flint Seed Democracy,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so anyway, I mean, this is I'd like to encourage you too to come back. Another thing is I'd like to maybe talk about eventually is JJ Cardinals, which is a naturalist shop, I would say, out there in Grand Blanc.
Okay.
They sell mason bees, which are a non-hive bee. They're a solitary bee. They don't live in hives
Yeah.
per se. They're least offensive, but they're also very good at fertilization, pollination.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a serious destruction of our honeybee
Catastrophic. Yep.
population in the United States worldwide
Hmm.
because of parasites and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I mean, those things are all crucial because let's face it, I mean, it's an amazing thing, but those bees and other insects do a great deal of work that are so beneficial to us humans that
Yeah.
most of us are unaware of.
That's an interesting. I hadn't heard about that that shop. There's bees are not the only things that pollinate plants.
Right.
Some things are pollinated by flies. Some things are pollinated by it's all different kinds of pollinators, moths, and when we think of honeybees, we're usually thinking about imported European
Right.
honeybees, which again is an example of this genetic loss, which we're counting on one species to provide our honey and to do most of our pollinating. And when they become susceptible to varroa mites or whatever, we see a large die-off. We have lots of native pollinators like the mason bees you mentioned, ground bees, that are just as valuable, if not more valuable. And just if I can, get on my soapbox really quickly, having worked at a hardware store and browsed the pesticide aisle, I like to encourage everyone. I know that the jury is still kind of mixed on what is causing the colony collapse disorder that you mentioned in bees. And it's probably due to a lot of factors. And one thing that I knew at one point was potentially implicated is a pesticide called imidacloprid, which is synthesized from tobacco. So initially was thought to be safer, but what they're finding is that it acts on the bee's central nervous system and kind of it makes them intoxicated. It sort of makes them high because what they're finding in the colony collapse disorder, you're not finding a bunch of dead bees around a hive, which is what you'd expect if they were dying from a disease. You find empty hives and no bees around them. And what's typically, they guess is happening with this imidacloprid, the bees are becoming exposed to it in the fields. They're getting disoriented and they can't find their way back to the hive and they're dying of exposure. Um,
That's fascinating.
yeah,
I
and
mean, who would have thought
imidacloprid
that?
is, last I knew, it was trademarked or it was patented by the Bayer Corporation, which is another large pharmaceutical corporation. And it goes under lots of different names. Among them in the United States is Merit. And in France, one of the names it goes under is Gaucho, and it's actually been outlawed there. But it's still legal for sale here. And you see it in a lot of grub control applications. And I would discourage people from using that. I know, like I said, that the jury's still out, but if that's even a possible factor in colony collapse disorder, we need to stop using it immediately. There's a really good book that was kind of an answer book to Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring called Fruitless Fall, where they look at colony collapse disorder. And this book's several years old now, but the author is sitting down to breakfast and he looks at everything on the table and he realizes that without bees, almost none of it would be there. They predicted in the book that within a few years the Florida orange industry could collapse and not become viable anymore. The California almond industry, for example, would not become viable. Any place. Part of the reason that these bees are dying is bee growers, apiarists or whatever. They don't make their money primarily from honey. They make it by renting out their hives to pollinate apple orchards and orange groves and almond groves, and they're moving their bees all across the country, where they're being exposed to temperatures they wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise, and they're being exposed to diseases more rapidly than the diseases would have spread otherwise, because they're being exposed to all different populations of bees, and just like humans have introduced species into different areas that would maybe have gotten there eventually, but it would have taken a lot longer without our help. Diseases are being introduced to bees that might never have been introduced, or would have taken a much longer for them to spread, and the bees might have had a chance to become immune without our help.
Anyway, I mean, this stuff's a had because I mean, I was looking through a book on Michigan fish, the fish varieties of Michigan, and so many I found were introduced species, like the bluegill. When I was growing up, that was the quintessential fish you're going to catch any pond, stream,
Yeah.
lake, whatever you're from Michigan.
Yeah.
You're going to catch a bluegill. That's an introduced species.
Yeah,
Many of our trout species, our salmon species, are introduced species.
sure.
And I just started wondering what was here. I mean, we had all this water. There must have been something living in those things before these people from Europe brought in the food, the fish, the types of fish they're more, familiar with.
Yeah, and invasive species are that's one name for it. Invasive species is that's a controversial issue because So many of the most economically important vegetables that we grow are introduced. Like people have said, who can imagine Italian cuisine without tomatoes? But tomatoes are not native to Italy.
No.
You know,
About 100 years ago, most people thought they were poisonous.
poisonous. Yeah, and one thing I like, there's a wild food author, a forager that I really like named Samuel Thayer, who points out, and he has an article about amaranth, which is a weed here, but it was actually one of the first crops to be domesticated in the United States, and in North America, most of the crops that we take for granted, like tomatoes and peppers and corn, were domesticated in South America. But amaranth was one of the few that was actually domesticated in North America, and European settlers brought relatives of amaranth with them. And Samuel Thayer points out that, like honeybees and some other species, including humans, they brought a new variety to a country that already had it. Like we brought European humans to America when there was already an indigenous variety,
Right.
and like usually happens with invasive species, the introduced variety takes over and just about wipes the other one out.
Well, I guess dandelions weren't. They were also an native species. I mean, let's face it, they're ubiquitous. I mean, you
Yeah,
look around in the spring, you see them everywhere.
yeah,
We would growing up. I thought they were like just as natural as the air growing through the backyard. But I mean, they're an native species. I mean, it's an amazing thing how much we've impacted,
yeah.
and we did it so cavalierly, basically.
Yeah, I know.
You know.
It's very short-sighted. And then I said like it's controversial though because it's hard. So many of them are economically important or extremely healthful. Um, there's a really great group that we're friends with called the Flint River Wild Ones that is very committed to native species and to eradicating introduced species or invasive species. And it's a hard call because it's such a, I don't want to discourage them, but it feels like a losing battle a lot of the time because they're so well adapted to spreading themselves, these invasive species. Typically you'll see like on any block in Flint there's a tree called Ailanthus that it has an unmistakable smell. It kind of smells like peanut butter that something horribly wrong has happened to, like a cross between a skunk and a peanut butter. And it has these conspicuous clusters of orange seeds that are kind of nice to look at, but economically the tree is worthless. But you see this in a lot of invasive species that they produce a tremendous amount of seeds, and the seeds are usually very viable, and they wherever they land, they reproduce.
Mulberry is the same way.
Mulberry, yeah,
Right.
same thing. And I think most mulberries are introduced. I think that
Because the white one, I guess, with the variety was supposed to be
yeah,
for the silkworm
for
production.
silkworms, and
Yeah.
that flopped. They introduced it thinking that they were going to have a silk industry in the United States, and it never materialized. And now we have an invasive white mulberry, which I believe that the red mulberry is indigenous to America, but that was one of the plants mentioned on the Renewing America's Food Traditions list was the red mulberry because wherever these plants are muscled out by these introduced species, you don't see as much of the native ones.
Anyway, we should wrap up this conversation,
Yeah,
but I'll definitely invite you to come back at
yeah,
different
sure.
times and talk about like I said, Jake, if you get a chance at JJ Cardinals, it's a store in that little strip mall right across from the Grand Mall
Okay.
in Grand Blanc. It's right on the it's a corner. It's the corner store as you pull into the complex,
Okay.
and it's like just down from the Citizens Bank building,
Hmm.
down there on South Saginaw Street in Grand Blanc.
Okay.
So directly across, like I said, from the Grand Mall. So I mean, it definitely has all kinds of stuff. For a person like you, I could see definitely because it sells the different types of moss that people like to introduce to their gardens.
Yeah,
It sells the praying mantis, cases.
that's neat.
It's also got the mason bees and some other stuff. So you should check it out.
One quick thing before we run out of time. One of the ways that we distribute our seeds is through local events. Like I
Yeah.
said, I show up with my little basket, and I wanted to let people know that we are going to be at the Keep Genesee County Beautiful conference on March 9th from 8 to 1 at University of Michigan Flint, and immediately after that, we're going to be at the visioning workshop for the Flint Master Plan at the Mott Field House, 1401 Court Street, from 12:30 to 4:30.
Well,
So people can pick up their seeds then if they'd like to.
definitely, it's a great conversation, and I definitely like to see more of this kind of stuff. And I would
Absolutely.
invite you to, when you're about talking to people, if you guys have an idea, anybody who wants to come in and talk about this kind of stuff, I
Sure.
would encourage it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.